I think we can get started. First of all, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. It's really great to see you after this couple of months. The last virtual working session we had from the Transformational Change Learning Partnership was all the way back in September because we had our in-person event and our annual workshop in October. So we're delighted to be back with our working sessions this time. And at this specific point, in this Transformational Change Learning Partnership working session, we will have ICAT, the Initiative for Climate Action Transparency, leading and presenting on their carbon market investment and portfolio tools, the Transformational Change Toolkit that they lead. In this working session, they will go through this specific toolkit as a set of easy-to-use tools that support the assessment of potential transformational change on a wide range of climate change policies, actions, and projects covering both mitigation and adaptation. This session will be led by Dr. Hannah Sui and Oleg Bulani, both from ICAT. Very quickly, Hannah Sui is a climate change expert at ICAT, where she is responsible for managing the ICAT toolbox and capacity building initiatives. Prior to joining ICAT, she worked for UNOPS, coordinating its global capacity building and training programs, and was a university lecturer in climate change and development studies. Hannah has also worked in the management and coordination of programs related to climate change and disaster risk reduction in various locations in the Asia-Pacific region, working for both private sector and companies and NGOs. Oleg, on the other hand, is a senior program officer at ICAT that coordinates the development and implementation of ICAT strategies and regional and country projects. He has a strong background in climate finance, MRV, and carbon markets. Prior to ICAT, he managed climate finance, accounting, and reporting at the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, the EBRD. And previously, Oleg developed the carbon markets regulatory framework at the UNFCCC Secretariat that provided a climate change consultancy service. Right before we start with their presentation, very quickly, this is the agenda. It's just a quick introduction on my side. Then the floor will be for Hannah and Oleg to present on the toolkit. Then we'll have a plenary discussion where we hope to receive your feedback in terms of the toolkit itself, and then a quick wrap up and next steps. A few technical reminders. This working session is being recorded, as you probably noticed on the pop-up that came when you joined. Please mute your microphone while others speak. Raise your hand to contribute to the discussion. We would love to hear from everyone here present, and allow everyone a chance to speak, listen actively to others. If you prefer, you can also chat directly to General Roberts, who is in the session, if you need any technical assistance, or if you also want to add any questions, please feel free to add them at the chat, and then we can probably open up the mic for the Q&A session and the discussion session. Having said this, Hannah, Oleg, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Alfredo, and good morning, good afternoon to everyone. Thanks for having us today and for the opportunity to present the work we are doing in ICAT and our perspective on how to assess the transformational potential of climate policies, measures, actions, and investment projects. And I would suggest that we would use the next 30 minutes to briefly present the ICAT, which would be useful to understand our perspective on transformational change. Then I will briefly explain the methodology and the concept that we put into the transformational change potential assessment. And then I will hand over to Hannah, who will present you the toolkit, which is the operational part of the methodology that was developed like 6 years ago. Next slide, please. So the ICAT, or Initiative for Climate Action Transparency, the partnership that was set up in 2015 with the mission to support developing countries to advance their transparency agenda. Transparency, I mean like MRV of all kind of forms, to collect data, to monitor the implementation of policies, actions, NDCs, and to report to UNFCCC, to report to the national government, and other things related to data collection management and analysis. And since 2015, we've been working in more than 40 countries through the direct country projects. We also supporting the 3 regions, Central America, Central Africa, and Central Asia through our 3 regional hubs. And we have like quite extensive suite of tools and guides, which are more than 40 now. And those are available to everyone to use, together with the supplementary materials like capacity building modules, tutorial videos, and some manuals on how to use the our tools. Next slide, please. So on the next slide, you will see our like a core of our suite of policy assessment guides. That's where I got started in 2015 through several years, where we developed the several policy assessment guides for different sectors, including agriculture, energy, transport, industry, and building efficiency. All these policy assessment guides are based on the WRI policy assessment standard, if I remember the title correctly. And the main purpose of it is to assess the greenhouse gas potential of the policies and measures, ex ante or ex post. And then we also developed the cross-cutting guides, which you can see on the bottom side of the slide. Those are to complement the policy assessment guides. So if, for example, you apply the guide for agriculture and assess the GHG impact of agriculture policies, you can also assess the impact of those policies on sustainable development goals. The next cross-cutting guide is transformational change, which is the subject of our session today. And that also is sort of supplementary to the policy assessment guides, because one of the precondition to use the transformational change potential assessment guide is to have the GHG impact in place, because that's one of the outcomes that it needed for assessment of transformational change potential. And then we have other process guide like stakeholder participation and technical review, which is very useful to enhance the credibility of the outcomes of the assessment. Next slide, please. So all of our guides were developed in quite inclusive process, and through the creation of the technical working group, pulling the technical experts who drafted the guides, and then technical experts who review the guides. And the transformational change methodology was developed by the NGO called today Copenhagen Climate Change Center, which is UNEP CCC. It was DTU in the past. And the co-lead agency was the WRI. Then the technical working group, as I said, was created. The guide itself went through several rounds of review, and it was also applied for 1 or 2 pilot studies that also indicated at the end of the guide. And the objectives of the guide is, first of all, they understand the nature of the policy, whether it would lead to transformational change or not. Then it would also aim at attracting climate finance, because as many climate funds and MDBs, they require demonstration of transformational change potential when they receive the submission from the project proponents. What's also important that if the guide is applied ex ante, then it can help to improve the policy design, because through the application of the guide, it can be clearly seen what aspects of the policy basically degrade the potential for transformational change. And then by addressing those issues, the potential can be increased. Next slide, please. So it's all starts with a definition, and that's different variation of what we are all using for transformational change in our entities. So we put it in a way that we understand it in a way that it should be opposite to incremental changes in economy. So it should be disruptive, it should be sustainable through the years, and it should contribute to not only to climate change objectives of Paris Agreement, but also be aligned with the sustainable development goals. And next slide, please. So now we are coming more into the depth how we trickle down the definition of transformational change into outcomes and processes, and that is needed also to select the criteria for the assessment later on. And we in our methodology we stick to two outcomes, which is the greenhouse gas mitigation potential or adaptation benefits, and sustainable development goals outcomes. And in terms of processes, we selected 4 groups. Technology, in terms of whether it's a new technology and it requires research and development, or whether it's a mature technology and it would require more upscale efforts. In terms of incentives, it's more like a fiscal incentives or removal of fossil fuel subsidies, for example. In terms of agents, we classify those as for example, entrepreneurs or institutions that are developing norms and standards. And norms and standards by themselves are one of the 4 processes that we consider when assessing the potential for transformational change. Next slide, please. So that's basically the result, and I will get back to it at the end of the methodology overview. So the processes and the outcomes lead to the development of the indicators and assigning the scores for each of the indicators, and then the scores lead to this heat map that you can see on the screen. And that heat map gives you basically the estimation of the potential for transformational change, from very likely to very unlikely, the likelihood of transformation, and the extent and nature of impact from major to basically to none or to negative outcomes. Next slide, please. Then our methodology followed the steps, and the application starts with describing the policy that is the subject of the assessment. And by describing the policies, it's also important to define the boundary, whether it on the national level or the sectoral level, or it could be regional, for example. And the period usually should be aligned with the lifetime of the policy. For example, if it's a feed-in tariff till 2030, then the period of the assessment would be limited up to 2030. Next slide, please. The next step is probably the core of this methodology, is the selection of the characteristics that will be assessed for transformational potential. And those characteristics are very much linked to the outcomes and processes that I mentioned before. And first, the stakeholders who are applying this methodology need to understand the characteristics. And then they need to agree on what is the phase of transformation the policy is a starting point of the policy. And then the vision for transformational change that is aim of these policies is important to define the range of indicators that are needed to assign the score for the assessment later on. The barriers, in turn, would reduce the potential for transformational change and would affect those indicators. Therefore, it's important to understand what are the barriers for transformational change and whether those are addressed by the policy or the policy is not comprehensive and those barriers would remain, and that would make the policy less successful. And as a final sub-step is basically the selection of the characteristics, because not all of them might be relevant for the particular policy. Next slide, please. So these are the basically the outline of the slide that I mentioned before about the processes and outcomes that are the core for building the heat map with the potential. And you see that technology is broken down into characteristics like research and development, adoption, scale up, and all other processes assign their characteristics in a similar way. And for outcomes, the characteristics would be the micro, medium, and macro level. And by those, we mean that, for example, the emission reduction, what is the magnitude of emission reduction in comparison to the national emission profile, whether it's a major or minor, what would be the scale of outcome in terms of improved air quality, that would be the micro level of the outcomes, and what is the sustained nature of outcome in the short term, for example, in the coming couple of years, and then in the medium term, limited, for example, by NDC target, and then in the long term, up to the 2050, in case a country has the long-term strategy. And that sector that we are trying to address through the policy is mentioned in that strategy. Next slide, please. So that's one of the steps that need to be discussed by stakeholders for the selection of characteristics is the phase of transformation. For example, if the policy is trying to address or introduce the technology that is mature on the markets, then we are in probably phase 3, which is acceleration, and then the policy should be focusing on scale up the technology deployment. However, if the technology is new, then the focus should be on the research and development, and that would be the relevant characteristic for the assessment of transformational potential. So that is the role of assessing the phase of transformation which policy try to address. Next slide, please. So those the barriers for the transformational change, and the stakeholders who are applying the methodology should basically assess those barriers through the lenses of the policy. For example, if the technology is mature and the reason why it's not deployed in the country, that is too expensive, for example, or there is no technology available, then the financial constraints and technology barriers should be looked at, and the policy should be analyzed in a way whether the instruments of the policy would alleviate those barriers. And if not, that would degrade the potential for transformational impact. Next slide, please. And the next step would be the assessment of the starting situation, like a baseline. For all the characteristics selected in the previous step, the applicants would need to identify indicators and describe the starting situation or the baseline situation. For example, if, let's say, the simple example of feed-in tariff for renewable energy, the indicator would be the installed capacity of renewables in the particular market, for example, the rooftop PV, how much of that capacity is available in the country today. And then why the vision that I mentioned before is important, that it should be the range between the starting situation and the value that is the policy is aiming to achieve at the end. And the vision is helpful to identify that capacity at the end. Then the next step would be the estimation of transformational impact ex ante. So, as I said, we selected the characteristics before, we assigned the indicators for each of the characteristics, we assigned the value for the starting point, and then we try to, through the estimation of the barriers, through the estimation of the phase where we are, in terms of the policy, we would score those characteristics, whether they would really be in fact impactful for policy implementation. And then the aggregation of the results would give you the heat map. Next slide, please. So ex post is not very much different from ex ante. It's just assuming that the data is already available. So what we've been assuming in ex ante as a value for indicators at the end of policy implementation, for ex post would be the real data from the ground on how the policy been implemented through the years. And assessment of the characteristics and aggregation of results would be the same. And I think it's good to revisit. Yes, next slide, please. To revisit the slide that I showed before, and so that is basically the outcome of the whole assessment. So, as I said, for all the processes, it's going to be characteristics selected by those who apply the methodology. For each characteristic, you would have the value. For each value, the methodology proposed the score, which is from 0 to 5 or from -1 to 5. And then those scores need to be aggregated. And then that aggregation would place the dot on the heat map. And that would give you the output of the assessment in a way that the transformational change is likely to happen, and the nature of transformation is sustainable, and it's maybe from major to minor, depends on the magnitude of the impacts. As you can see, it's multi-dimensional assessment, and that was quite complex, and it requires a lot of supplementary documents collected by stakeholders to do that assessment. And sometimes it's not very objective how to assign the score. So that could change the output of the assessment very much. Therefore, it was really the need to standardize that kind of the process. And that's why we decided to move on with the toolkit, where all those scoring aggregation of result would be done, as an engine of the toolkit, and would not allow the users to manipulate with the data. And the toolkit then evolved into 3 products. And I think now it's a time to discuss the tool, and I will hand over to Hannah, who will present the toolkit and how the methodology been turned into the web-based tool available to the users. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Oleg. Anna, floor is yours.
Great, thanks. I think you can move on to the next slide. And then the one after. Great, thanks. So earlier this year, in April, we launched our transformational change toolkit, which is a web-based software, which makes it a lot more straightforward to do this transformational change methodology that's in our guide. But we didn't want to just make it more straightforward. We also wanted to expand on the methodology. So we wanted to also be able to include both mitigation as well as adaptation aspects. Currently, the guide just focuses on mitigation. And we also wanted to expand it in terms of the different kinds of interventions that could be assessed. So to also include carbon market interventions, investment interventions or private sector interventions, as well as looking at the assessment of multiple different interventions at the same time. So I should just clarify, when I say intervention, this could be anything from a policy, a project, an action. These are all what we refer to as interventions within the toolkit and within the guide. So there are 4 tools within the toolkit that cover this very wide range of interventions. So the first 2 focusing on carbon markets as well as investments. Then we have what we call a general tool. So this is essentially for a huge range of different interventions that don't come under the carbon market and the investment. And then we have the portfolio tool, which provides a comparison of different kinds of interventions that are being assessed through the other tools, so the carbon market, the investment, or the general tool. And it shows the aggregation of GHG emissions, as well as the alignment to national SDG priorities. So when we were developing this tool, this was done through a consortium of different partners, including UNEP, Copenhagen Climate Centre, Perspectives Climate Research, Carbon Limits, as well as Climate SI. So it was really a collaborative effort. And during the development, we also did an application case study in Vietnam, which really helped to refine the toolkit to make sure it was really relevant, but also really usable at the same time. So next slide. So the toolkit covers the entire assessment process that Oleg has described. So it essentially maps out the process and makes it really intuitive. So the user knows what sort of questions they're supposed to be answering, and also gives them different categories for what to choose within the different assessment questions. So it also makes it automated in terms of the calculation. And Oleg also mentioned the fact that, it gives that very strong degree of consistency in the way in which the methodology is used. So everything is automated in terms of the calculation, and that heat map that we also showed, that's also automatically generated. So the degree of rigor that we wanted to include in the toolkit, it was really enhanced because we were able to include things like mandatory fields, also mandatory justifications. So when a user selects a certain response for a question within the assessment, they also need to include as a mandatory field the justification for that. So then it's increasing the level of, I think, transparency within the assessment process. Next slide. So just touching on some of the tools that are covered within the toolkit, and starting with the carbon market tool. So all of the tools within the toolkit follow that same methodology within our transformational change methodology. But with the carbon market toolkit, the carbon market tool, we wanted to include additional conditions. So these are around the social and environmental integrity that need to be met specifically for carbon market interventions to be considered transformational. So this is why this carbon market tool is a tool and is a separate tool within the toolkit, following that same methodology, but including these additional questions around social and environmental integrity. And this tool would particularly be useful for Article 6 activities. Next slide. And then in a similar way, the investment tool as well, again, following the same methodological approach, and that's with the processes and the outcomes, but also, again, including additional questions, additional conditions, specifically for investments or activities that are at least partially funded by private sector sources, as opposed to solely from a public budget. And there's a wide range of potential uses for this as well, beyond the national governments. Next slide, please. And then finally, we have the portfolio tool. So this enables the assessment of multiple different interventions. So this could, for example, be a country's NDCs. And here's where we really see, I think, the strength of the toolkit, because it makes it very straightforward to do the assessment of multiple different interventions. So as long as you've done the assessment of an intervention in the toolkit, whether it's the carbon market, the investment, or the general tool, you can pull these different assessments together into a portfolio, and then the portfolio tool automatically assesses it and aggregates the GHG emissions based on those different interventions that you put together in the portfolio. And it also shows the different alignment to the national SDG priorities. So it does this all automatically as long as you've done the assessment through the toolkit. Next slide. So let's go to the next slide again. So I just wanted to show an example of what the portfolio tool does. So here we have a subset of 6 different SDGs from a hypothetical country. And on the first row, you see the intervention's impact. So this is a singular intervention that has been assessed through the toolkit. And it shows the different potential impacts for those different SDGs in terms of the minor, the major, the minor negative, so the range of different kinds of impacts. And then on the next row, you see the priority of that SDG for that country. So that is also included within the toolkit assessment. And then finally, on the last row, you see the alignment between the intervention's potential impact and the country's priority in terms of the SDG, and then it shows it in the row at the bottom, the kind of alignment. And this is just displayed in terms of color, and that will also show in the reports that are generated by the tool. Next slide. And then here you can see within the portfolio tool, of course, you can do this for several different interventions. So you can see the alignment compared. Here we have 3 different interventions, so you can see the alignment amongst the 3 different interventions within this country. So next slide. And then within the portfolio tool, we also have the GHG aggregation amongst the different interventions that are included in the assessment, which shows just a summary of the annual emission reductions that are expected from all of the different interventions. So it gives a really nice summary to be able to compare the potential GHG emission reductions from a wide range of different interventions. Next slide. So I want to now do a short demonstration of the toolkit itself. I think maybe the best way is if I share my screen now and talk. Okay, so I'm sharing my screen. Hopefully you can see it. Great.
Yes, Hannah, we can see it.
Yes, perfect. Okay, so when a user first goes into the transformational change toolkit, you'll be able to see an overview of the different interventions that have been assessed, depending on the different tools that have been used, the common market, investment, the general, and then also just a general overarching overview as well. So this is what the overview page will show. What I want to highlight is these little icons that we have throughout. So we've got a little video icon here because on every page we've integrated how-to videos to really facilitate the independent use of the tool. So if I just click on the video, it pops up. And this is a step-by-step sort of detailed video on what's going on that page. We also have the little eye icons to give a little bit more explanation on what's going on in each of these different areas. So when you first start, you want to create an intervention. So as you can see on the page, all of those different questions that are needed to input from the methodology are all here. So it's very clear to the user what needs to be included and what they need to consider. And then again, we have that little eye icons to provide extra explanation for what needs to go into these different fields. So you would first create your intervention, and this is no matter what tool you want to use. And then once you created that intervention, then you can go and select one of the tools on this left-hand side. So oftentimes a user would already know which tool they want to use. But if not, you can also go here and there's a little decision tree to show you which tool you should use. So if I just go into the general tool here, you can see that there are all these different question fields that need to be filled out. And you can see that it's very much based on the methodology that we've just presented. So looking at the vision in terms of the different time stages, looking at the barriers, all of that is mapped out on here. And then if I just want to go into here to show a test version. Great. So here at the bottom, so this is a test version. You can also see the different questions that need to be filled out in the assessment process. So this is using the general tool, and then the carbon market investment tool will have different kinds of questions as well. So here you can see the different selection options, and then the justification field as well. So that's all mapped onto here. Now, once a user has completed a few different interventions, you can also then use the portfolio tool here. And then if you wanted to have that assessment of different interventions, you just click on add new portfolio, and you would just click on the interventions that you wanted to assess. And then it would aggregate it automatically for you. So I want to just have a look at this one because this is what then comes out. So the toolkit automates the whole assessment process. You can see all of those different fields are included here. And then right at the bottom, the automated heat map as well, which is generated by the toolkit. And then it's a one-click generate report process where the report is automatically generated in PDF form. And then, of course, you can also download as an Excel. So this is a very quick overview of the toolkit. I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm going to put up, if you can put up the slide deck again.
Will do right away.
Great, and we've just included a QR code for the access to the toolkit. So this is available. This will take you to the ICAT website where we have a dedicated page for the Transformational Change Toolkit. It's completely free to use, but you will need to get in touch with ICAT for the user account details. You just get in touch with us and we can provide those test account details. We also have a couple of case studies that we can also share, and we'll share in a follow-up email some of the applications of the transformational change methodology in particular that we've done in different countries, which I think will be also useful to better understand what can be achieved from this methodological process. So yeah, that's all from me. And I'll hand back over to Alfredo, and looking forward to hearing any questions in the discussion.
Thank you very much, Hannah and Oleg, for that fascinating presentation. I'm very interested and thrilled overall to see how a transformational change framework can be operationalized to this level, considering how complex of a concept it is, and how much as well our TCLP community of practice, which we have here present, has demanded already for a while that we be as practical and we operationalize the concepts as much as we can. So I think this is fascinating to see for sure. We have quite a few interesting number of people from our community of practice. I see people from NDBs, from our NDBs, AFDBs, IDB. I see also civil observers. I see, longstanding people from our community of practice, such as Reese. So right now because of the time, we have around 13 minutes for discussion only, unfortunately. I'm pretty sure people have a lot of questions. Instead of going one by one, like doing a question and then us discussing, I'm gonna put the 4 questions out here so that to see if we have any reactions from the audience. And those questions are the ones you can see. Do you think this toolkit is an effective approach for assessing potential for transformational change? Which features of the toolkit do you find most relevant to identify signals of transformational change? And are there any aspects of the toolkit you would like to modify to better align with current approaches or requirements for transformational change? Finally, would you consider using any of these tools in your current work? And if so, if any would be needed, what changes, if any, would be needed to make them more applicable? I see there's these are a couple of people that have put things in the chat. That's Janelle and Nasiba asking you to put if you have any questions or comments there. But I do see a lot of people that have been working with us in transformational change framework for a while. I see, Kader, Marisa, I see Sophia, I see Reese, a lot of colleagues here that could potentially have some doubts. So I don't know if any of you would like to make a comment or a question to our panelists. I see Giovanna. Giovanna, if you want, you can unmute yourself and make the question.
Okay, thank you.
Of course.
Hello, everybody. I'm Giovanna Montagnier from Bastel, a consultancy firm. I wanted to know if the methodology has been used for organizations other than governments, or if that's something you are exploring as a potential adaptation. Thank you.
Sure. We could probably take one by one questions while we allow the other participants to think for theirs as well. So Hannah, I'll over to you.
Yeah, I mean, maybe so at the moment, because we only launched this toolkit sort of some months ago, I don't think we have any applications per se from non-government organizations. But the reason why we had developed this toolkit is so that it could be applied by a wide range of users. So this is certainly, I think, one of the things that we envision for the toolkit. And I know that going into 2025, we're really going to be encouraging more of this kind of application from a broad range of stakeholders. But Oleg, maybe you have something else to add to that.
Yeah, the idea that the methodology can be used by anyone, for example, if someone is having the project or program of activities for Article 6, they can run it and do the assessment for transformational change potential. It's just the nature of ICAD that we are working with the governments, and therefore our applications are mostly done by consultants who've been implemented the projects for the government. But I will try to find out some of the case studies which are more like industry related, and that could be done by industry practitioners.
Thank you very much for that. Let's see if there's any additional question. I might put, if not, I don't know if Reese, you're there. Like not to put you necessarily on the spot, but we've had a lot of discussions with Reese Warren, and a lot of discussions on what are the next steps after we have the signals of transformation, signals of process, and the outcome signals as well. What's next for it to be more operational, and at the same time, how do we align it with current ML frameworks that demand a little bit more, like indicators? Is there any way of linking it? So, Reese, I don't know if this aligns in a way with that discussion that we've been having, and how do we feel about a toolkit like this?
Yeah, I think it's really exciting, and it looks like such a heavy lift to put this together. And oh my gosh, thank you, because it looks like something that really could be broadly applicable. And I've been thinking of, as you were talking about a lot of different uses. I think it does help pinpoint some of the real linchpins of change and help people focus on those. And I think that piece is really useful. I did have a question for you all, if you don't mind. I was wondering, the people who have used it, what have they been most excited about, and what is it that really resonates most with the people who've used it so far? Because it really does look interesting.
Thanks, Reese. Back to you, Hannah and Ollie.
Yeah, I think what was interesting, for example, in case of Argentina, that they didn't do the very nitty-gritty detailed assessment, because methodology allowed for, for using like a fast track assessment. So they did like a comparison of different technologies and policies in the country for selecting the most potential one, and then to make a recommendation to the government to focus on it. So that was the really interesting application. So they didn't focus on one policy and to look what works, what doesn't work, but they did the landscape, analysis of what is the most attractive in terms of transformation in the country. And then I don't know, for country projects that we do, normally, government officials and practitioners, they are so overwhelmed with the I would say the foundational thing that they need to do, like put together NDC tracking inventories. Then this kind of methodology or assessment for impact on sustainable development goals, it's something that we often, if not suggest, we insist to include in the scope of the project, because we are interested to see the outcomes of that. And after the application, they're becoming like more exciting about this additional perspective of the work they do. For example, in one country, we found out that all the climate change policies are embedded in the national development strategies, and for them, this assessment of ESG impact was really like useful to have, to see how it's work aligned with the national strategies. For transformational change, for many countries, it still remain like more academic discussion rather than practical. But what I found really interesting is that through the application of the toolkit and the methodology, the policymakers can see what are the loopholes in the policy and what would really prevent from upscaling the technology or reaching out the goals, and that's something that could help them to change the policy, to refine it, to adjust.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Holly, for that response. Perhaps I can quickly ask, I don't know if our MDB colleagues, I see Kader from AFDB and I see Sophia and Mar from IDB. I don't know if you have any reactions on this toolkit, and particularly as we've constantly discussed how to operationalize and bring the transformational change framework into a more to a daily operations, sort of not just for MDBs, but for everyone. But in your perspective, perhaps, I don't know if there's any particular reaction. If not, is there any particular question that we would like to add to this session before we close it from anyone here participating? I see observers as well here. Nasibe, yes, please.
Thank you, Fredo, and thank you, Hannah, and for this great presentation and Oleg. So my question is around, because, well, I should introduce myself. My name is Nasibe Timur. I'm part of the facilitation team for the Transformational Change Learning Partnership. And one of the sort of approaches that we're looking at is ensuring that in our frameworks and our toolkits, there is equity and inclusion, and the voices of the marginalized groups or the people who are more affected by climate change are heard. So in turn, does your toolkit have any approach to ensure equity and inclusion, especially in contexts where data is limited?
Perhaps before you respond to that question, let me open it for Sophia to make a final comment as well, and then we can finalize with both of the answers.
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me now?
Perfectly, Sophia.
Okay, great. Sorry, the microphone issues when we switch from home to office. So unfortunately, I wasn't able to listen to the whole presentation, but I did catch a very good part of ICAT's kind of framework, and I wanted to congratulate you particularly. I think for us, it's very important to capture both the process and the outcomes, because as you know, sometimes we want to make assertions of like the potential of a project because in the process, because the outcomes take a long time to come to fruition. So we really appreciate, or I personally, I really appreciated kind of that clear distinction in the framework. And then to the questions that you pose here, and again, so much has gone into this. Very, very happy to see this so kind of practical and systematic, because we are as MDBs, we get pushed on a lot on reporting on the quantitative kind of aspect of our climate action. And we are looking for ways to tell the story of the qualitative kind of elements of our operation. So the ability to look at the whole portfolio of interventions, for example, I work on Paris alignment. And so we look at every single operation, whether it has climate finance or not. And so, in reserve of looking more directly at the whole inner workings of the tool, I think a possibility of application for us is helping us, have a systematic approach to our operations in terms of being honest, is there any transformational quality, and can we report that at a portfolio level when we talk about our climate action in our projects to the external world, if I may, no? So that could be one application. I don't know if it's something that we could collaborate on in the future, but I really would appreciate the kind of access to kind of test it out. We would be very interested because, as I said, we are looking for ways to kind of build on this narrative for our alignment efforts with the Paris Agreement. So thank you. Congratulations.
Thank you very much, Sophia, for that. And I would just like to, before the answers, to ask Janelle to post our feedback survey. We always have one to see how much you've enjoyed or not, and what recommendations you have for next working sessions. But Oleg, Hannah, the floor is yours to answer those last two questions or comments.
Maybe I can just respond to the first one on the equity question. So within, I think, the ICAD approach to transformational change, we also have a lot of guidance in terms of stakeholder participation and how you would engage with different stakeholders within this process of assessing policies and obtaining data. So part of going through the transformational change methodology, there'll be a lot of guidance in terms of looking towards this other guide that we have on the stakeholder participation method that includes all of those really important aspects of equity and inclusion. In saying that, also throughout the assessment process, in terms of the individual questions, there are questions that really point towards that broad whole of society approach that includes, including responses that you would need to have that equity and inclusion perspective to be able to answer. So within those questions, you would need to look very broadly in terms of the whole of society and looking at different norms and behaviors, including different groups, marginalized groups, and inclusion in order to answer those questions. So hopefully that responds to your question. And Oleg, maybe you can respond to the second.
Apologies, can you remind me the second question?
So it was just about the MDBs and the holistic approach that this would be really beneficial for. Is that what I understood, Sophia?
Yes, it was rather a comment, but
Yeah.
happy to hear reactions if that could be like a feasible use of this tool or not, or it's not really intended for that. Yeah, maybe that reaction.
Okay. No, I would really encourage you to use the tool or to compare the criteria that we put into assessment with the criteria that you use, because we are not bound by any joint MDB commitments, where if for Paris alignment, for example, you discussed it for a couple of years and then you come up with the methodology that is now sort of a methodology for all MDBs. We can change the criteria, we can adjust them for the broader, use of the toolkit. So if, for example, for some of the processes like technologies or agents, you would like to include or remove some of them, then we can definitely discuss it, and we'll be happy if our toolkit will be used not only by country officials, but by MDB also.
Thank you, Oleg and Hannah. Wonderful work.
Thank you very much, Oleg, Hannah, for your answers. Thanks, everyone, for your comments. Just on a quick final note, first, we will be sharing on again the video that ICAD has made around the toolkit. We will be sending the methodology PDF that they also shared before this event, and we will be sharing a case study specifically used in Argentina, so that all of you can see it and have a wide range of tools to address this specific toolkit. And then perhaps on a final note, we will be pausing the transformational change working sessions, the TCLP working sessions on December. We won't have any because it's way too close to the holidays, but we will be resuming them on January 23rd. So we're definitely looking forward to reconnecting with you after the holidays at that specific time. Having said that, thank you everyone again for coming to this working session. Thank you to our panelists, and definitely looking forward to seeing people using more of this toolkit. Have a wonderful rest of your week.